Hi there, this is Amy Sluss. I'm here today to talk to you about talking to your daughter about tough subjects. This is a topic that I have led many families through. It's a very challenging thing to do. We all have lists of things in our heads that we're reluctant to talk to our daughters about. Dads and moms struggle with this equally. What's hard for you to talk about? See, I do these events teaching moms primarily how to talk to their daughters about difficult subjects frequently. And I find that every family's different, every woman is different. What makes you uncomfortable? There are some common themes and topics that come up time and time again that cause parents discomfort. Here's a list. It's hard to talk to kids often about mistakes, especially when you make your mistakes yourself as a parent. It's hard to admit to, and it's hard to talk to our kids about our past mistakes as well. Some families have a lot of trouble talking about failure. Their daughter's failure, their own failure. Economic hardship is particularly difficult for middle class, upper middle class, or affluent families who live in areas where there's a lot of economic affluence and well-being. When economic hardship strikes your family, it can be very difficult to talk about. When it strikes a good friend or a relative, it can be very difficult to talk about. Family secrets. Most families have some secrets, or as we call them, skeletons in the closet. These are the things that nobody talks about. No one talks about Aunt Betty, who's in a psychiatric hospital at the time. Nobody talks about Cousin John, who has a problem with drug abuse. What are the skeletons in your family closet? One topic at the top of most parents' list is sexuality. Most of us struggle with this a little bit. We don't quite know how to bring it up. We don't know how to talk about it. Basic human anatomy is difficult for some people. Some families can't say the words penis or vulva or breast. Sexual function and this thing that we call desire that's very normal in humans, they're very difficult to talk about. How does sex work? What's it all about? What does it feel like to feel desire? And how do we tell our daughters that that's a normal thing? If we don't tell her that it's normal, we're not going to have a chance to help her understand how to channel that normal desire. And then varied sexual practices. Your daughter's going to hear about some of those. You're better off breaking the news to her in advance before she hears about them. Pornography is difficult for families to talk about. It's very prevalent in the preteen and the teen world. And I would be surprised if your daughter and her friends have not already seen pornography. The studies are showing that kids are watching it younger and younger, and the studies are, it's very, very frightening to most parents. Rejection can be very hard to talk about. Girls who treat other girls in a mean fashion, especially if it's directed at your daughter, it's difficult to address. People feel very strongly about these things, about being left out, being rejected, about having a friend treat their daughter in a negative way. These are pretty normal life experiences for all of us, and it really is helpful if we can talk about it with our daughters. Death and terminal illness are difficult for many families. Some of you know this, most of you probably don't. I was a hospice nurse for a number of years, and it was really interesting for me to watch certain families would even keep the terminal illness diagnosis away from the person who was dying. The family members found it so difficult to talk about death and terminal illness that they couldn't even tell the person who was dying that they were dying. This is actually a more common phenomenon than you would think. Most of us, because we don't understand death or terminal illness and we really wish it never happened to anyone, it makes us not want to talk about it. But it's a normal part of life. It's part of that circle of life. And if you have pets in your household, that's a great way to, begin a conversation about death and terminal illness, because most of our pets die during our family upbringing years, and we have this opportunity to talk about those difficult things about loss and how much it hurts. When you have persistent disagreements with your daughter, maybe you have different temperaments than you and your daughter have different temperaments, or you disagree about how things should be done. And when those things go on day after day, week after week, sometimes year after year, it can be really hard to talk about. And then the final category I have on the screen is human weaknesses, especially when those weaknesses happen in the people that we love, when it's grandma or grandpa or Aunt Susie or maybe dad or maybe you. Things like alcoholism, drug overuse or drug abuse, gambling or other addictions, overeating, overspending, all these things are challenging for some people to talk about. I want you to pause this program right now, get out a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, and make a list for yourself. What are the things that make you feel really uncomfortable when you think about talking to your daughter about them? Maybe sex is on that list. And then if you write sex on the list, I want you to write next to it the parts of it that make you feel uncomfortable. You don't have to tackle everything at once, but it's helpful to start a list so that you have somewhere to go. So please pause this program and make a list of at least 3 or 4 things that you find challenging in terms of talking to your daughter. Now that you have your list, let's move forward. What happens when we avoid these topics? Your daughter is going to learn about the content anyway. She's going to eventually find out that Aunt Betty is in the psychiatric ward, or that cousin Susan overuses drugs and may be addicted to drugs. But she might hear it from an unreliable source. Specifically things about sexuality, she's going to learn about it anyway. Very often, misinformation is shared about sexuality in the preteen and the teen world. If you avoid these topics, she will not come to you with questions because your message will be loud and clear. We don't talk about that here. We don't talk about that in our family. I'm not comfortable with it. Those are the messages that she's going to get from you if you are silent on these issues. The other thing I want you to know is that if you don't impart the knowledge to her, you lose your opportunity to impart the values that go with that knowledge, that go with that topic. So if you don't teach her about sexuality in any way, you are not going to be imparting the values you want to impart to her on that very important topic of sexuality. She will learn and believe incorrect information, and if we avoid it, she will eventually use Google in an attempt to answer her questions about these sensitive subjects. And I will tell you a little story. When I was a few years back, I try not to do this very often because I just don't like to. I was Googling some sexual terms to find out what would happen, at least in the Google results. So I typed in oral sex, and I got the first 3 listings on the page were porn sites. The 4th listing was Wikipedia. So I pressed Wikipedia and I went to Wikipedia to see what they would say about oral sex. Well, they described oral sex very accurately and in a pretty easy to understand and reasonable fashion. I thought they did a good job of that. But the thing was, there was a drawing of someone performing oral sex on a man right there in the Wikipedia page. So I want you to know that your daughter knows how to use a computer. Many of them have portable devices that they take with them everywhere, and if you don't talk to them about some of these issues, they are going to Google it, and they're going to see things that you may not want them to see. Once they get those images in their head, they can't really get rid of those. They're there for life. And there are far more images out there that are crass and displeasing than you would like to think. So let's look at the other side. What happens when we do talk about uncomfortable topics, these important topics to our daughters? Well, first of all, your daughter's going to get good information, and she'll feel empowered by having the truth. It's a very, very powerful thing to know that you have the right information. When you are brave enough to tackle these subjects, she will feel secure with you and with the knowledge in the sensitive subject area. So it will bond her more closely to you, and you will be giving her great knowledge. A result of that is that she's more likely to come to you when she has questions or issues that come up in her circle, or when she hears a reference that she doesn't understand. Instead of Googling it, she's more likely to talk to you about it. It's true that you're probably going to feel uncomfortable. I'm going to just suggest that that discomfort will last for you for about 60 seconds while you impart information to your daughter that will be useful to her for years. You will get over your discomfort, and you will be glad that you addressed the topic that you thought was important with your daughter. And then finally, you will have an opportunity to pass on your wisdom and your values. And I think you're going to feel good about that. It's a really good feeling to be able to do that with our kids. Some of the common parental concerns that come up over and over again are this idea of innocence. If I talk to my daughter about these topics, am I like taking away her innocence? That's what moms ask me on a fairly regular basis. And I think that there's some misunderstanding around this word innocence and around the role of education. Learning something does not spoil a girl's purity, nor does it spoil her innocence. Knowledge actually protects her. I can tell you lots of horror stories about girls stumbling upon a situation or hearing information from in their peer group where that they didn't understand, and talk about breaking their innocence wide open with a visual that the girl really didn't need to see. Information and knowledge is protection. Some parents worry about hypocrisy. They want to talk to their daughter about drugs or sex, and they wonder, how can I do that if I want to discourage her from getting engaged with these things, and yet when I was a teenager, I used drugs or I had sex younger than I wish I had. Like, how do I do that? Isn't that hypocritical? That's a very common question that I get. And I'm going to give you permission to not share your history with your daughter if you don't want to. It doesn't matter. She doesn't really want to know if you had sex at 16 or if you didn't have sex for the first time until you were 21 or 25. She doesn't really want to know. So you don't have to worry about that. You just want to tell her what she needs to know about these subjects and what you think is best for her. The same is true of drug use. You can tell your daughter whatever you want. If you use drugs and you don't want her to use them because you learned firsthand how dangerous they are, go ahead and tell her that. But if you just have this bad feeling about it and you don't want to share that with her, you have permission as an adult and as the parent to not tell her. And I don't think she's going to ask you. Most kids do not ask their parents about their sex lives or about their drug history. And the most common concern the parents have, which I really understand, is that they don't want to give their daughter too much information too soon. And that is an admirable concern. However, in today's world, due to the nature of information in our world today, it's better to educate your daughter a little on the early side rather than wait and have her find out this information from unreliable sources, maybe in a crass sort of situation. So in general, you want to give your daughter information about how her body functions and what her body parts are all called as she grows up. You want her to know about basic sexual function probably before she goes off to middle school or in early middle school, because she's going to start hearing references. So you want to give her that information so that she doesn't get humiliated or find herself in a situation that's uncomfortable. Rules. Brief is best. Do not lecture. There is no such thing as the conversation when you talk about sex and sexuality. You have to have small conversations along the way, and she doesn't want to lecture, and it's not helpful. Illustrate your points with stories. Stories are very interesting. You can tell stories about things that happened to you, but you can say it happened to one of my friends. Well, when my best friend was 15 or 16 or 17 or whatever it was, and then you can just tell the story. You can embellish these stories. You can convert your stories to stories about somebody else. in order to give your daughter some information about how things happen in life and what it's like for girls in terms of body changes, sexuality, dealing with drug use, dealing with problems with friends or rejection, managing family members with terminal illness, upcoming death, things like that. All these uncomfortable things. It's really helpful to share stories because it makes it alive and it makes it more human. Establish a safe environment with your daughter. Do not tease her about her body. Don't tease her about someone that she may have a crush on. Do be lighthearted and feel free to use humor, but not crass humor. Crass humor is difficult for girls to understand. They don't get it, and they find it usually offensive once they figure out what's going on, and it's not helpful. Do feel free to repeat your messages. I urge you to do that because your daughter won't take everything in the first time you talk to her about a particular topic. We really only remember about 10% of what we hear. Do use multiple modalities for teaching. I would suggest that you get some books, especially in the realm of sexuality. There are lots and lots. I used to refer people to books, but what I find is that people have such a individual preference for the kind of information they want their daughter to have at a certain age that I urge you to go to a bookstore and page through the books or get on Amazon and look up some books and order a few, read through them, and decide what you should give to your daughter. I would have a book reference for her. I would see if you can find shows and programs on the topics that you're concerned about, if it's terminal illness, if it's functions of the body, all kinds of things about drug use, drug abuse, addictions, how people manage those. There are all kinds of books and programs out there. So talk to her, share stories with her, and provide reading material and programs around these challenging topics. And the most important thing you can do is the one at the bottom of this screen. Maintain a positive relationship between you and your daughter throughout the teen years. Do whatever it takes so that you can keep conversations going, that you can break down barriers that are going to come between you, that you can heal the disagreements that you're just naturally going to have as parent and teen throughout the years. Make sure that you put a really high priority on having a good relationship with your daughter. Common reactions of a girl when you bring up these subjects that are sensitive and tender and maybe sometimes embarrassing. First of all, if you're talking about family issues, your daughter will likely ask you questions, especially if it's in regard to somebody that she cares about or knows well. If it's a terminal illness diagnosis, if it's an addiction, if it's a problem that someone's having, try to break down this thing that feels like shame. Being human isn't shameful. People make mistakes. People have uncomfortable things that we have to address on a regular basis, and I'm all for busting shame. Your daughter may thank you for being open and honest with her. She will have understanding, knowledge, and she will probably have increased empathy for those who are involved, especially if it involves sort of family skeletons in the closet. When you talk about things about reproduction and sex, your daughter will probably be embarrassed. She may pretend like she's not listening. She may plug her ears and try to avoid the subject. She might say, "Mom, stop it." But you have to persist because you are her role model, you are her teacher, and you have wisdom that she needs to hear from you. So please push through that. Know that all parents struggle with some subject matter. Know that you will recover from your discomfort after you break the ice and discuss the uncomfortable topic. You will actually get over it and it'll become easier. You will never recover if you don't tell her, because she could lose trust in you and she may make a critical mistake that can't be undone. We can all heal from mistakes, but there are some mistakes that just can't be undone. Know that you can do this. I've trained thousands of parents, and I know you can do this just as they did. And there is more help out there for you if you need it. If you're really struggling with this issue and you have a situation that you are really uncomfortable about broaching with your daughter, go talk to a therapist or contact me. I'm happy to walk you through it. I do one-on-one coaching, so you can contact me. My contact information is on the last slide of this program. We'll get there in a few minutes. Tips. For you, practice starting the conversation in advance alone. Get your first sentence out. Formulate it in your head. Practice saying it aloud while you're alone. Do that while you're driving in the car. Do it while you're looking at yourself in the mirror, and get that initial discomfort behind you. If you can't formulate the words to yourself when you're looking in the mirror, you're not going to be able to formulate those words as you look at your daughter. Try talking to your daughter when you're doing something. Maybe you're driving in the car. Maybe you're standing next to each other at the sink washing dishes. Maybe you're hiking or walking together in your neighborhood. Those are good times to talk. You're kind of busy. You don't have to make eye contact, and you can start the conversation then. If you're really intimidated, this is my best tip. Try talking to her in the car in the dark. You can't really see each other. You have to look at the road. You can't really look at her face. She's not going to look at your face. And I have to tell you, this is a tactic that more parents than you would imagine use to break the ice and get those difficult conversations started, by doing it while you're driving in the dark. And mom, if you're struggling, I'd like you to consider turning on some episodes of Gilmore Girls. If you watch some of those episodes of Gilmore Girls, you will be inspired, because Lorelai talks to her daughter Rory about all kinds of things, and she's just totally in your face out there and open about it. You can just see how they do it. You will not be like them. You might not want to, if your daughter's young, you may not want to share these programs with her, because they do talk about all kinds of things. And I'm suggesting it for you as mom to get your brave side going. Your daughter is so worth it. Her sense of self, her confidence, her relationship with you, the way she relates to the world, the way she understands some of these very difficult topics. She is so worth it that you have conversations with her and help her understand what you know. It is a loving thing to share difficult topics with girls, and love saves lives in all kinds of ways. If you need help, please go to my website. You might find some articles on there that you might find helpful, or you can contact me at aceless@fabtobefem.com. Like I said, I do one-on-one coaching with moms and sometimes with girls as well. With this, I appreciate you joining me for this program. I hope you'll take your list of uncomfortable topics for you and start working on when you're going to address these very important topics with your beautiful, loving daughter. Take care. Blessings to you from my heart to yours.